All right, good evening, everybody. For the record, it is Thursday, September 17th, 2020. So this is a work session of the Wenatchee City Council, so a little bit more informal. Again, for the council members and those that are here today, or those that are listening at home. So this is being recorded. This is on YouTube Live, so there'll be people watching. So just understand that this is being recorded. Previously, pre-COVID, these weren't. So this is being recorded for everybody to live in here. So we've got 3 items. The first is regarding a development agreement between the City of Wenatchee and Triad Maple regarding the development that we've talked about for quite a while up above the cemetery in Wenatchee. So we've got Glenn and Rob and looks like Stephen and
Steve Smith is here, and
Steve Smith and the lawyers. We got
all
everybody.
kinds of people here to answer questions. So, development agreements are, we've done a few in the city, but they can be very complicated. This development agreement addresses a variety of topics, and so we'll go through that. I did provide each of you a hard copy. I know you'll get a copy in your council packet for next week as well. So just as some background information, so Triad Maple LLC, Beaconsfield Associates 2, Mike and Karen Wade, and Bart and Sheila Clennon are the applicants, and they're proposing to develop approximately 167 acres into a maximum of 450 dwelling units. With that also is a central community building and an RV storage area as well. The purpose of the development agreement is to help identify the necessary infrastructure to develop the site, as well as to set appropriate time frames in which those improvements will be completed. Also addresses a variety of zoning and subdivision standards and fire and building as well. As I said, the development agreement also establishes certain vested rights that will run with the land for the term of the agreement. Here's a map of the project. On my left is the property boundary and the proposed layout. On the right, the property does encompass 3 different zoning districts: the residential foothills low, primarily the residential single family, and then a portion that is residential low in the bottom right corner in yellow. So just a quick primer on a development agreement, what it is and what it isn't. First of all, it's a voluntary contractual agreement between the city and a property owner, and it's authorized by the Revised Code of Washington in 3670 and 170. The development agreement sets the development standards and other provisions that apply to govern and vest the development, the proposed uses, and mitigation of the development for the duration of that agreement. The development agreement consists, it has to be consistent with our development regulations. So a development agreement can't change or set policy for the city, but it does allow the developer to vest those standards for a longer period of time than is allowed otherwise. And so that's the same there, that it does grant some vested rights consistent with our existing code, but it does allow the developer to use future codes so that as the city changes, our code changes, they can elect to use new codes as well. And then that would bring the whole development up to the new set of standards. So it doesn't lock them into what they have now for the term of the agreement. There is some ability to go forward, but once they move forward, they can't go back to what they had before. So our process so far, that's our workshop this evening. A public hearing is scheduled for next meeting, September 24th. We did provide an opportunity to comment with a notice of application for the development agreement as well as the subdivision application. And we provided that notice to surrounding property owners, to agencies, public agencies that have jurisdiction. We've received numerous comments, and those have been incorporated into the various documents. On the environmental side, we did issue a mitigated determination of non-significance for both the development agreement and the subdivision application. So that mitigated determination of non-significance, it's also a voluntary agreement entered into by the developer with the city. And that outlines a variety of environmental impacts that have been identified, such as mule deer habitat, stormwater, roads and infrastructure, various land use, geologically hazardous areas. So a wide variety of environmental impacts are addressed in that document. And then the city has proposed, and those have been agreed to by the developer as far as mitigation means to offset the impacts of their actions. So now getting into the components of the development agreement. So this site, again, it's 167 acres, a variety of different zoning districts. If it were flat, which it is not, the maximum density would be 979 dwelling units. The development is proposing a maximum of 450 dwelling units, and that's a part of infrastructure, the topography, taking into account that not all of the land is developable. They are proposing a variety of housing types, some traditional single family, but also taking advantage of some of the housing code standards that were adopted in 2019. So they're using our clustering provision. We had clustering standards, we updated those. So a portion of their development is going to be clustered lots. So they're going to be smaller than a standard lot. And then the difference between that lot size and what the standard is then set aside for open space. And so they have a fair amount of open space actually, but then that open space is set aside as a permanent tract, either for active recreation, trails, viewpoints. It could be for habitat protection. There's a wide variety of options there. They are also looking at the potential for some townhomes, which again, we didn't have the ability for them to do that in our previous code unless they went through a planned development. So you may recall also in 2019, before we adopted the housing code update, the city did enter into a development agreement with Triad to, should they choose to go through that planned development process, they could still do that. Right. But with the development agreement and the mitigated determination of non-significance, moving forward, they may not have to take advantage of that. This provides them with a lot of flexibility. And so that multifamily, the townhome, that was part of that existing development agreement. Vesting, this is of course a very important part of land development is the vested rights that come with that. This is a multi-phase project, so 450 maximum units. It's going to take some time for the developer to reach that, and there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be installed before that can happen. And so as part of the agreement, it provides them with an extended time frame. The proposal in the agreement is 20 years, which this development agreement would be active and enforceable on the development and by the city. And with that, the zoning and the subdivision standards would vest for that time frame. And so, and as I mentioned earlier, as the city changes and updates our codes, though, they would be able to take advantage of new codes that are adopted by the city. So it doesn't lock them into what they have now for a period of 20 years. So there is some flexibility built into that. Building permits, however, would not be vested for that duration. And so a building permit vests at the time that it is submitted. And so that it remains the same. So building codes, as they're updated, then they would be subject to the updated building requirements that are adopted by the city. The agreement also allows the developer to vest, again, the development under the new regulations, as I mentioned earlier, and also provides the provision, so if the underlying zoning and the comprehensive plan designations change, then they would also be able to, at their choice, elect to take advantage of those, the opportunities, land development opportunities, lot sizes, housing types that may be allowed they'd also be able to take advantage of that. And that's part of the agreement that gives them that flexibility to move forward with the city, or if they elect, they can stay where they're at. But it provides the developer with a certain amount of assurance that they can develop the site in a way that they want to now, and then they can move forward and change as needed. There are also several timing components of this, and so they can't, there are certain thresholds that they have to meet, and infrastructure has to be constructed at certain times throughout the project. So the first one is that the city would not issue any building permits until they've finalized their first phase of the plat, and they've completed the Maple Street improvements, which includes a new bridge across the irrigation canal. Once they've done that, then they can construct up to 100 dwelling units. But they can't go above that until they have a second access into the site. And that's at this point proposed to be the Springwater Avenue improvement, so that the negotiations with the school district to obtain the right-of-way to Springwater through the school district property, that would be their second access.
And that deal has closed. So we have purchased that property, that transaction is done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that provides them the avenue to complete those improvements and then move beyond that 100-unit threshold. And then in the development, and Rob Jammerman, who's here, can show you a little bit more information on that. But there's a road J in the agreement, and that's the upper threshold that they can then develop to. But once they want to go beyond this road J, then they have to complete the rest of the infrastructure requirements. So then they're built into this agreement, thresholds and timeframes to complete that. So that gives the city also the assurance that this infrastructure will be constructed as the development progresses. And with that, I think I'll turn it over to Rob Jammerman now, and he can. Right there.
If I could real quick, just a little bit more on the vesting.
Oh, sure.
Glenn DeVries, Community Development Director. 20 years might seem like a long time, but for 450 units and the amount of infrastructure, it's really not in the scheme of things. If you think about a typical plat, each phase of the plat can take up to 5 years. And then if the next phase is turned in prior to that, you can continue the 5-year increments. So really, with 450 units, you can easily get to the 20 years without this development agreement. Really, there's not a huge difference there as far as continuing the zoning vesting. Really, it's providing the predictability. A development agreement is voluntary for a city and for the applicant, and it provides the city predictability, as Steve talked about, and assurances for the public on some really great infrastructure, circulation, fire apparatus, roads, which the Public Works Director will talk more about. And then it provides the applicant some assurance on important infrastructure. So just something to keep in mind as you go forward, that what the purpose, what the agreement provides for.
Thanks, Stephen. Rob Jammerman, Public Works Director. So I'm going to pull this down and make it, I won't project to my right or left. So the slides, I have 4 slides to go over the financial details, but we also gave this to you in your packet tonight. And so the slides roughly follow the color bands across here. So it's if you, between now and the hearing next week, if you want to study, you want to come back to this, this is kind of lays out the financial details. So the first part I'll cover is the triad contribution, and that's the yellow on the sheet that we gave you. And so Triad is obligated to install all of the urban infrastructure on Maple Street east of the canal. And the city has about that estimated value of those improvements are just under $1.4 million. So they're going to, with this agreement, they'll build all of those curb, gutter, sidewalk, all of that infrastructure, and the crossing of the canal. They're also obligated through this development agreement the roads within their development are valued at over 13 million. And the key there is that is part of our Western Foothills Impact Fee Study, when we identified all the foot roads that we needed in the foothills, and it was just to build fire access roads, not actually the curb, gutter, and sidewalk. So when you see 13 million, just imagine a 24-foot wide paved road without any curb and gutter. The actual build out of them is probably more like 20 to 25 million by the time they build all the other infrastructure that goes along those. So $13 million in fire access roads, both in right-of-way dedication and improvements. And last, the completion of the off-site improvements on spring water across the school district property valued at 1.1 million, a little over that. So the total estimated value of the spring water contribution to the city for the purposes of the development agreement is valued at $15.5 million. The city's contribution, so you may recall when we went to the bond market for the city hall bond. We also borrowed an additional $2 million to help fund this agreement, and the mayor had spoke to you about this, and so you might recall that was, I believe, third or fourth quarter of last year. And we also knew we were going to be building sewer in Maple, so the sewer utilities contributing approximately $139,000. So the city contribution on this development agreement is valued at $2,139,000. And we also have an outside contribution from Mr. Wheeler, who we did a development agreement with a few weeks ago, because he is on the front of Maple Street where those improvements are being built. So he dedicated some extra right-of-way, you might recall, and he's going to be paying right about $47,000. So the total dollar value coming back to Tri-Development is $2.1 million. It gets complicated. That's why we've got the sheets there in front of you, and you can feel free to contact me if you have any questions afterwards. Before we, as we're going through this process, the city has some contributions prior to payment on the development agreement. So we started up there, you can see, we started with a 2.1 million cash balance. The city's paid $150,000 to purchase the right-of-way across the school district property, and as the mayor mentioned, that deal has been closed. We are now the owner of that property. We are going to be having to purchase additional right-of-way along Maple Street, and the estimated value of that is $234,000. These are costs the city is incurring, and then we are doing all of the design for the Maple Street plus inspection, and that is valued at $262,000. So we start with the 2.1 million, and then we take off those three costs totaling $646,000, and the remaining dollar amount that we can then provide back to Triad is 1.5 million. So that's how that math works. And so with that 1.54 million, the development agreement then speaks to the payment of that. So the first payment of $840,000 will be due to Triad within 60 days after the preliminary plat is approved. And they'll take that $840,000 will then be used by them. We're paying them for the right-of-way that's within the subdivision that we need for the fire access road. So in Washington, that is one way that development agreements can be paid, is we can pay for property. So we're paying them, these payments are paying for the right-of-way, and they're dedicating that to the city. So that's one thing to keep clear here. So this $840 within 60 days, and then the additional payment of $700,000 is due upon when they complete the Maple extension up to Springwater. And so once they're there, as Stephen mentioned, that then allows them to build the first 100 units. We will have been paid the 1.54 million, and from there on out, then the next mechanisms for building things are the number of units. So as Stephen mentioned, they can do 100 units up to that point, but once they want to go up the hill further for more than 100 units, then they have to build the Springwater extension. Again, that's all of their costs, and then further up and over into the main lane. And we'll pull up a map here in a minute. So, oh, good. Yeah, here's the map right here. Thank you. So you can see Stephen added this map. He's got an arrow there pointing to the Springwater extension. So that is the Once that's completed up to the school district property, that's when we make our second payment. And then you can see the Maple Street improvements he's highlighted there below. As Steve had mentioned, all of these road improvements, full urban street improvements, curb gutter, sidewalk, of various types of streets. And let's see here, Road J. Okay. Yeah, so see if I can move. No. Oh, there we go. Yeah, so Road J is right here, if you can see that. So they, when they go into their second phase, they can build up to Road J without having to build the connection over to Main Lane. Once they go, want to build any more units beyond Road J, they have to complete the road all the way up over to Main Lane and then into Main Lane. So that's the third access into the project.
And if I could, Rob, these trigger points were coordinated with the City of Wenatchee Fire Code official and the fire district as far as what access is necessary for the amounts of development as they move forward.
So how do you determine at what point in time do you go after a certain road with access versus the second one? Like what's the mindset?
So I don't know if Cliff wants to, because Cliff was our fire marshal, Cliff Burdick, yeah. And he helped us navigate this with the fire chief.
Fire code's pretty specific in that. It specifies when you go over 30, you either have to build a fire access or have a plan that shows how you're going to build it in the future. And so we discussed with the fire chief and I, so okay, where do we feel comfortable as far as letting a certain phase, because that's the way they build these in phases, is letting a phase build out and then getting the next phase to put in the access road. And we feel pretty comfortable at 100.
So in theory, is there a way to not bypass the fire code, but is there a way to just say, okay, well, we know that you need so many units built to get the first access and then the second. Why can't you just say, you know what, let's just get them both built all at once? Why doesn't that work?
Well, we look at it both ways, from what our needs are and what they can do, right? They need to develop some of their property and sell some of that property before they can afford to build all those accesses. So
Okay.
it's kind of a two-way street for us.
Okay.
They'd like to sell some of those 100 lower units, right, to get that money to use for to build the next set of roads.
Okay.
So I think we're trying to work with the developer to say, if we said build it all now, they got to go out and borrow, 40 million. So,
Yeah.
Yeah, those road improvements
this-
are a lot of
Yeah,
money.
do these here first, get those sold if you want to do more. And they can go faster if they want, if things are going quicker and they want to do more to get more on. I'm sort of assuming they probably will, but we have those mechanisms built into the agreement that they can't go any further than that until they complete certain portions of the project.
Yeah, I believe once they get up to about Road J, as I recall, that's around 230 total lots.
Somewhere in there.
And they'll have, so under that scenario with 200, they'll have two good fire accesses into the project. So they really meet what Cliff was referring to is that has a good, what the city considers good access, dual access. But they can't go into those upper phases until they get that third access into Main Lane.
Yeah.
Which then those lots that are accessing off the top have two ways to go. They can go into Broadview or they can come back down into this subdivision in the event of an emergency.
Can you show me on the map which one's the first phase? I know that J would be, the second phase? That's where the second phase starts? Road J?
Do you want to, or I can,
Ruth, you have this towards the back of your, that one sort of, I think, is the best depiction. And you got to sort of turn it.
Yeah.
Ditch is here, right?
Which page is it
This is sort of like phase one.
Which one's phase one?
There's all this lower stuff up to Springwater.
Oh, okay.
Right, that's all the townhomes, right? And then if they want to go up the hill, right, and this goes all the way over to Broadview.
Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Right, thanks.
I have a quick question, just probably my prejudice will show here, but we're getting these fire access roads in and whatever, which we wished we had some of those a few years ago. And we've worked really hard to get that. As I look at this, I get nervous because you've got, I guess I was hoping that we were in a process of eliminating cul-de-sacs, dead-end roads. And if you take Broadview burning and you just take up a selected spot somewhere in there that whole neighborhood is going up in flames, you could very easily have whole sections completely cut off and isolated, and nobody can get to them. So I don't know, a comment, I mean, help me feel better here, but I really get nervous when I see cul-de-sacs, especially tucked right up there against the fire line.
Yeah, the fire code allows up to 30 on one access road. So most of those cul-de-sacs you're looking at, those are less than 30. And the difference between this development and Broadview, these will all be built to wildland urban interface standards. So they're going to
Okay,
be
I understand
Class
that.
A, non-combustible materials and that. But in the event of a big storm like we just had up north, that might not slow them down.
And then the comprehensive plan discourages cul-de-sacs, but does allow for them for situations where it doesn't make sense for looping them, where it meets the fire code, but also sets it up for future connectivity. So essentially the cul-de-sac becomes temporary. So if you look at this area over here, there is a future connection point that will loop up to the upper plateau. So in this circumstance, this is essentially
Next one.
uh,
Oh, God, sorry.
Yeah, our little map sort of shows it in there, yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
so essentially, the cul-de-sac is temporary and provides for future connectivity.
Okay.
The other one is the topography in that area.
Right.
Just you can't get streets to connect in that hillside.
Yeah, I understand that. It just,
But
getting
we-
people trapped and nowhere to go is,
Yeah,
And not trying to get too into the details, because the lower portions where they got the multi-family or townhomes, those would all sort of be required to be sprinklered anyhow, would they not, Cliff?
The townhomes, no,
Okay.
unless they're constructed in more than 4 units per
Got it, okay.
townhome. Yeah, only the multifamily would be required to be sprinkled.
In that zoning district, we would not allow them to have more than 4 attached townhomes.
Okay. All right, you want to, what's next, Rob?
We just had some slides here showing the various cross-sections of all the roads that are, so this is all laid out in the development agreement. A lot of thought went into this upfront with the developer and staff. They've been reviewed by the fire department and meet all of those standards. So Stephen, you want to take over the last part here?
If I could, as you're coming up, Stephen, we do have the applicant's primary consultant and legal counsel on the phone.
Okay.
And so they just are making themselves, they're not part of the presentation, they're just making themselves available. If you have questions for the applicant tonight, they are here for you.
So let's, do you have anything else to add, Stephen?
Nope, just what it says, next public hearing, and then should the council approve the development agreement for next week, we do have a hearing scheduled for the October 12th for the hearings examiner. And so tonight we have, again, Steve Smith, your legal counsel. We've got the community development, building, fire, public works, finance.
So
We're all here to answer
walk me
questions.
through the process. We adopt it before the planning commission sees it?
So the planning commission doesn't review the development agreement or the subdivision.
Okay.
So in this, the process is the development agreement happens first. Once the city council has approved that, then the development which they've submitted is consistent with their development agreement as far as the housing types and lot sizes and things like that. Then we go to the hearings examiner, and it's his responsibility to review and then condition or approve the subdivision application, which they've also given to us.
But he has to make sure that it's consistent with our code.
Exactly.
Okay.
So we'll go through a consistency analysis with the hearings examiner to show that the development that they've submitted to us is consistent not only with our current code, but with the development agreement. And then the hearings examiner makes that decision, then provides them with the preliminary approval, and then they can begin the infrastructure improvements and the final plats to build out the lot.
Okay, so who's on the line with us? Anybody on the phone that was wish to sort of give the council any sort of additional information? I don't know if Pete Fraley's on the phone or engineering folks. Who's on the line there?
Mayor, this is Pete Fraley.
Hello, Peter. Go ahead. We'll give you a couple minutes.
Thank you. I just wanted to start off by thanking the staff, Stephen, Rob, Glenn, Cliff, and the entire team. It's been a good collaborative process to get to this point. We've been working on this for over a year, as you know. The presentation tonight accurately sets forth the scope and terms of the development agreement, so I'm not going to revisit any of those details. Just truly appreciate staff's responsiveness and collaboration to get to this point. Just a couple of things I just wanted to mention, because there's been a couple of issues that have received a lot of attention recently. One is legacy pesticides, and we work very closely with the Department of Ecology to develop a plan in this regard, and as part of the CEPA process, Ecology's comment actually indicated that they approved the plan and encourage other developments to accept this approach or to adopt this approach. The other issue that's received a lot of attention has to deal with mule deer habitat. And again, the Triad team worked very closely with the Department of Fish and Wildlife to develop a habitat mitigation and management plan. And actually, the comment letter under CEPA, DFW actually commended the applicant for the approach taken. So since those were very public issues here in our valley here recently, I just wanted to bring those to your attention.
Thank you, Peter. Anybody else on the line that wishes just to give a couple of comments before we get on to our next item? Okay. Any questions, council members?
No.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, this is Brett Booth with Blue Line, the engineer. I'm just excited about this project and just look forward to it moving forward. So thank you for letting me listen in.
You bet. Yeah, so I don't have any questions. Obviously, we'll take this up next week, probably in a public hearing item next week. So we'll
Correct.
take public from the comment. We get our public comment at that point. We could have more discussion if need be. I'll probably give you my viewpoint next week, but I think this is a really cool thing for the city, and I think our financial contribution is very reasonable for what we're getting, and excited to have 10 years of building lots available to be built. And I think adding that, if you're seeing anything in our community right now, it's people trying to get here as fast as they can. And I think this development will add housing types that people are going to want to live in. All right, thanks, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody on the phone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, so Cliff, are you next on prop grading and filling, or is that, oh, that's Rob again. Okay.
No, that's me.
All right,
And Glenn, don't run away, Glenn.
all right.
Okay.
Oh, this is the retaining wall issue.
This is the retaining wall issue, yeah, so this is a report back to the city council on some research that we've done and some conversations that we've had with the planning commission regarding retaining walls on side and rear property lines that are adjacent to existing properties. So I want to kind of lay out a couple of scenarios. I've got some pictures, and we kind of want to talk about some of the issues that have been brought to us and some concerns. And so newly platted subdivision, multifamily development created, Site grading occurs on the property that facilitates the new residential development. That includes the utilities and all infrastructure. The site grading results in the new lots or the new multifamily development at an elevation higher than their neighbors. And so the site grading results in the neighbor's property. They end up below or in a hole, or they had a fence. Maybe their privacy now is compromised from what they had before. So a few pictures. So here's a residential subdivision in the city with the site grading that happened. And you can see at the far end of the lot, top bit of a fence. I'll show a close-up picture in a second here. So this is at the property line. You can see that they're about 4 feet above the neighbor. They've built a retaining wall, and the result of that is their 6-foot fence is about a 2-foot fence now from the north to south. I didn't show, I did not take pictures of the property, but there's a patio and a nice backyard, and so one can imagine some concern about that neighbor now looking up.
Because he'll put a house on top of that and be looking right down in there. Yep.
Yep, could be a house, or they can, someone can enjoy that backyard, and now they're elevated above that neighbor. This is the clip from the approved engineering drawings, and so this is an access road that comes back to these back lots, and you can see that here on this. This is the existing grading, is the existing topography before any grading is the lighter line at the bottom. The dark line at the top is the final grading. And then you can see that there's supposed to be there's a drop off and to the property line. And that's, they built a retaining wall, but that's essentially what happened. And that grading occurs so that the storm water can flow back to the catchment system and be funneled out into the city system. Another scenario, this is a multifamily project here in our community. And again, the site grading occurred and for a variety of site reasons, stormwater and others. The site is about 4 or 5 feet above the elevation of the adjoining properties. And so you can see from the drive aisle over the fence into the backyard of the neighbor. So we brought this issue to the Planning Commission, and there's a couple of things, I'll get to that, but the city code in its current form doesn't require that when a property is developed, that the adjoining properties are at the same elevation. So there's no standard that says that they have to go back to the grade. Talking to our development review engineer, before we had the land surface modification permit, the engineering division didn't really look outside the road prism. They're looking at that road corridor, stormwater, how that's captured. Since we don't have any codes for planning to look at, we really don't look at those standards, that final grading and how it relates to the adjoining lot either. So we looked at some codes. Chelan has some standards that speak to retaining walls adjacent to property lines. So we took a look at that and whether or not that could provide us with some help. In the both scenarios that we looked at that are recent, those walls are 4 feet tall, which generally does not require a building permit. So that happened as part of the development itself. So we took these issues and these questions to the Planning Commission to gauge their thoughts. The Planning Commission nearly unanimously, resoundingly, came back and said, we don't want more regulations on how someone can use their property. If someone wants to fill on their property, so they have maybe a depression, they should be able to fill that, build a retaining wall so that they can have a more usable backyard. The Planning Commission felt that that was a very reasonable use of an individual's property. And so they, their recommendation was that nothing be changed to us. It wasn't a formal recommendation in a hearing, obviously, but that was their feedback that they provided to us.
They're essentially comfortable with, our geologic review for erosion control, stormwater, We do have standards if a wall is over 7 feet, that it has to be tiered 5, 5, 3, and 5.
Yep.
Or visually obscured, and so they were essentially comfortable with those steep slope standards and our erosion and stormwater type control standards, but wanted the property owners to retain flexibility. Some of the complaints that I think some council members heard about were irrigation and easement oriented. We do think that we could, while we follow standard practices, in our subdivision code on a work list item, we are going to review, see if there are any other options that can be addressed for easements, but that's not part of this discussion in particular.
So just a question, because I know we have some strong personalities on the planning commission. I'll just leave it at that. Was there any strong personalities that might have carried the day there, or was it, you think it was a good discussion and all personalities there had a chance to sort of speak their mind and felt the same thing? You know what I'm asking.
Yeah, no, it was a very good discussion from the
Okay.
Planning Commission. We heard a variety of comments from Planning Commission members, and but
Felt
yeah,
comfortable with the discussion? And
Yes, yeah, they're
Yes.
very inclusive, very comprehensive conversation.
Perfect.
It was pretty much.
You know exactly
Very,
what I'm
very much,
asking.
yeah,
Yeah.
very much unanimous
Okay.
in
Great question.
their feelings of grading.
My question was, is this a common problem, not so common? I would think it's not that big of a problem throughout the city.
I think as we move closer to our foothills, we're going to see more grading, obviously, is required. But these properties, to begin with, are, both of the examples that I showed are not steep sites. They're relatively flat to begin with. So again, as part of the process of developing that site and looking at the way infrastructure works, and stormwater and usability of the site, that's sometimes or often a result of that is a fair amount of grading or excavation, and sometimes it does result in these scenarios, but not always.
And one thing we have done, which the council's done since in 2019, is the city has clarified that for these perimeter boundaries, so say it goes up 4 feet, on these new plats and multifamily developments, there's a requirement that you have to do landscaping or fencing. So on that does, I think in these scenarios can provide some assistance. Might not take care of all the concerns, but it can provide some privacy on that interface between, the raised area and as those two developments meet. So that is something that's been an action the city council has taken.
Could you go back to the first slide, the picture that you showed, which is the one that I, had, there was the issues with the irrigation and so forth and so on. Okay, so that was the first page. Go to the next one. I want to get to on the right-hand picture. So I put a 6-foot fence. Right now, the code is that I can have a 6-foot fence on a side of my property, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so can I put a 12-foot fence there to get back to where
No.
No.
okay, so I guess the problem, I have some real heartburn with this, and I guess I just can't come to the point where I think that it's okay for someone to put change the grade of the property, and then put the house on there that takes away my privacy, and I have no way to remediate. So either I get to, it's now my turn, or something, but there's got to be some ability to remediate this invasion of privacy. To me, that is absolutely 100% totally unacceptable.
So I have a question on the block wall let's say that's 4 feet of block. Can I put a 6-foot fence on top of the 4 foot of block?
So we have some building or some fence height measurements. So you would measure from both sides, both elevations, because one's lower, one's higher, and then you would, I think we average them out. So it may not come out to be a 6-foot fence, no.
Okay, but you could put a fence on the block
But they could put
wall
a fence on the
that would
block wall.
work to handle both properties if neighbors could be neighborly about stuff like that.
Correct. But
So maybe it's 4 feet or either that or they have to do landscaping, one of the two. So that's a clarification that was made in the code in December of last year, is that they have to do one of the two.
And the landscaping
That doesn't
would be
fix Jim's
higher.
problem, but I think if you were neighborly, if the right-hand fence went
That's a
down.
dangerous assumption, Your Honor.
Yeah, I know. And
Yeah.
somebody put a 4-foot fence on the other, you would sort of accomplish at least that part of it. You wouldn't fix the fact that if it's a 2-story house, someone's going to look right out, down, but, yeah.
Correct.
The reality is we have this conversation on a fairly regular basis, as you can imagine. If someone were to build a 2-story house, though, they would still look over a 6-foot fence, right? And so that, yes, we want to provide a measure of privacy, but our zoning code heights do allow structures that you can look over a fence.
Usually what?
That could look over a fence, right there.
Yeah.
We allow a 30-foot tall house. Now, something that did happen with the housing code update, and to particularly address this issue, was with accessory dwelling units. The Planning Commission did feel very strongly that if someone were to put an accessory dwelling unit in the backyard, that should have some more stringent height requirements and setback requirements. So there are some measures the Planning Commission did put in to protect views into adjoining properties as it relates specifically to accessory dwelling units.
I guess the other part of that, and particularly on this one, the other one, you don't see that, but this was, there was a whole bunch of stuff going on that, to me, was, I had some real problems with how this whole development was operated and run. But so the guy's got his fence, so he puts that block wall right up against his fence. So you're creating a fire hazard to start with. That'll fill up with debris. I'm guessing that whoever the developer isn't going to take any responsibility for keeping that maintained. Once he sells the lot, he's out of it, and so then that comes down to the property owner.
Correct.
And we know how irrigation ditches and those kinds of things work on up in the canyons. Same problem. So there's got to be some. I've said my piece. There's just got to be some kind of mitigation to protect homeowners from basically invasion. I look at this as an invasion. That isn't what the natural lay of the land is. And you go down 4 feet, it's still roughly flat out there.
So if we had Chelan's code, what would happen there?
Nothing different.
Okay.
Because it's triggered with the building permit. So if they did want to do a wall that required a building permit,
Got it.
then they would have had a step back of 5 feet.
Yeah, so you then increase, I think they had a 5 feet wall to property line, remember. And then if you wanted a taller wall, then you would have an additional setback from that. So that would push that. And then it also looked at easements, that you couldn't have that wall in the easement, I believe. So there are some provisions, and again, I think Councilmember Bailey, your comment is valid. Is that you have debris that falls in this area. The counter conversation that we have with the Planning Commission is if you have a 5-foot setback and then a wall, now you have a 5-foot area that's going to collect debris and weeds and.
But at least you can get into it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's what,
Yeah.
2.5 feet across through there. And
Right.
Was this built up like that across the entire lot?
So there's a retaining wall, and I couldn't tell you how the height of that retaining wall for the length of that south end of the property, but there is retainage on the length of the development.
My memory serves me right. I think there's probably about 3 lots there that
I think you're correct.
on that.
I think it's just absolutely bizarre.
Okay, so I guess at this point, what I will do then is we've accepted the planning commission's recommendation. When we meet again next week in regular session, I'll ask the entire council if they want to have staff look at something differently, and we'll make that decision then. Mark and Keith aren't here, so Jim's obviously got some consternation there. So I just think in the mayor's report next time, Laura, remind me, and we'll just make some decisions about whether we want you guys to start drafting some code that looks different or if we want to accept their recommendations. I'd like to wait for the other two council members to get here. Because I know Keith has the same heartburn that Jim has, and I don't know what Mark has, so. That make sense?
Sounds great.
All right, thanks, gentlemen.
We'll be ready.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
All right, Alyssa, Aaron, City Hall version 3.
You're going to tell us if you just found extra $5 million somewhere?
Oh, that's right.
You found savings. Not much.
So some of us did get a peek in the Social Security building this afternoon. It looks great, and I think there's some folks getting down there tomorrow morning at 9 if you want to run into it and take a look.
Oh,
Is it 9 a.m. tomorrow?
9 a.m.
Yeah, so if you guys want to run down at 9, I know Jose, Lynn, and I went in today after public safety. So if you guys want to run down and take a look at the team's great work. It does look really nice in there.
good. Need a hard hat?
No, just walk
Okay.
right in. They got their CO already, so.
Maybe. Very good.
All right. Good evening. Aaron Kelly, Operations Manager, and Alyssa Webb, our Facilities Manager. And we're going to be talking about this City Hall remodel project. So to start us off, just talking a little bit about the goals when this project kind of began. So our original goals was to have city administration located in the same building. This was going to allow for everyone to be more efficient and collaborative. It's also meant to be a better experience for customers by creating one-stop location. Our second goal was to deliver a product that surpasses expectations, or to basically build a great place for people to work. To be able to do this, the priorities were to get some natural light through the windows, and then also addressing acoustical issues with an open space workspace concept. And then the third goal was to stay within our budget.
Should that have been the first goal?
I think that was the third. So, and here's just kind of a recap of kind of where we've been through here in the last couple of years. So design began in February 2019. Design was completed in this June, and then we went out to bid in July. We rejected the bids in August. So our cost to date is $4.6 million, and that included the building purchase and the design. And the remaining is approximately $10 million, and that leaves about $7.5 million for construction. So our options at this point: do nothing, find alternatives for the bond proceeds. Our second would be identify additional funding sources to construct the project all at once, approximately $3 million. And then our third is a phasing option to keep within the current budget, knowing that the final product could be years away with the need for additional funding. And so really our task was to really look at this phasing concept and kind of break it down to give a couple of different options of where we could move forward. So Alyssa's going to go through some of these phases.
So with the phasing options, we were looking at a construction budget based on where the bids came back in July. So that's $8.5 million. So we looked at the building as a whole and broke it up into different blocks, so to speak, of areas that we could actually construct and move people into, and then do parts later in the future. So option A is the most expensive option, and I'll show you a schematic of what the build out of option A is. Phase one are highlighted in green. It would be the build out of the mezzanine and the first floor complete. It would leave out the construction of some of the exterior windows and also the site improvements. This caps our allowable construction budget at 7.5 million. So we wouldn't have much left over.
The site improvements, real quick, are,
The exterior components, the civil components of the project, so all of the sidewalk construction, the road realignments, the drainage in the parking lot, those types of things.
thank you.
So option B, also highlighted in green, phase one would be the construction of the first floor and a partial construction of the mezzanine level, the superstructure we would construct under phase one, but not complete the tenant improvement finishes. We would also, we would save that for phase two, along with the site improvements. The cost for this option on, again, July 2020 rates, prices, is $6.3 million.
That we get the windows and all that stuff sort of done, so the natural light comes in, which is important for the workers. We get chambers done and some of the first floor.
Correct. What we're not talking about is who moves into these locations.
Right.
We have that kind of penciled in. If you're interested in knowing those details as well, we can go into it. Option C, again highlighted in green, we would build out chambers, the Parks Department area, the whole mezzanine level, and the site improvement portion. We would also construct the superstructure for the rest of the first floor renovation, saving the tenant improvement portion of the first floor for phase two. This is broken up based on who is currently residing on the third floor. They would be moved, relocated into these spaces on an initial, leaving PSC folks out at PSC. Hurdles. There are some hurdles that we're going to have to get through. The redesign being one of them, breaking up these actual components into a new design, which is going to cost money. We're trying to time when the right opportunity to go back out for a bid to have a conducive bidding climate. You have to identify that. The current temporary working conditions and space allocation are components we need to consider. You know, we've got some temporary folks sitting in temporary locations that are not ideal. It would be a good idea to get those folks into a better temporary space. The future cost for phase two is a hurdle. And again, unforeseen conditions such as COVID.
Staff have a recommendation.
Wow, that is perfect timing. It's our recommendation that we go with option B. During that phase one, it moves the most number of staff over into the final space. It has a clean line of demarcation in the design.
Do we get chambers?
We get chambers. The budget is in line with what we have in the remaining funds. And there is a possibility we can squeeze in the site improvements with some value engineering, both in the interior tenant improvement package, as well as with some site improvement value engineering. And then in phase two, the mezzanine tenants the mezzanine improvements will bring staff from the third floor down into the core of the building, so it brings everybody together, which is the final goal.
So under option B, would we vacate the third floor then?
B1, B phase one. We would
Option
not,
B, phase one.
we would not vacate the third floor.
Okay.
The third floor would maintain. The only folks that would move out of the third floor would be finance.
Okay. So the mayor's office would still be on the top floor.
Correct.
And in the current finance space, we would actually be moving other departments in there that are, again, displaced by not.
So that does allow you to vacate most of the top floor of the other building?
Yes.
Okay.
I think I raised this question last time we talked about this on the, by doing it in phases, that obviously is going to cost you more because two setups instead of one. Thing. Any ballpark figure on how much that would add to the cost?
We anticipate us needing an additional $3 million to complete the whole package of construction.
Mhm.
So I don't know what the percentage increase is over what was for just the inefficiency.
So, yeah, I guess there's some things to sort of think about. I think two or three things to think about. I think we are kicking around the idea of maybe having our own district court, maybe sooner than later, and we'll chat about that in the next month or so. Sooner or later, I think the first we could start would be January of 2023. But I think there's some compelling reasons why we might want to do that, which means we either got to find some space here for the court and or contract with East Wenatchee or somebody like that. So that is in the back of my mind as we look at this. I obviously want the windows done. I think that we got to show the community that we're doing something to the outside of the building. And so I think that, to me, and then figuring out, can we get all of that top floor vacated over there or not? I know we've talked about some potential tenants, but the tenants over there are government entities that are doing the same thing we're doing, like how much office space do we really need and can people really work from home? And so there's a lot that sort of going into this kind of, some of this is going to be sort of a best guess. The one thing that, if you wanted to sort of go the full meal deal and come up with the extra dollars, the utility funds are the place to get them. But that they can pay for more because we do water billing and sewer billing, and there's I think Brad has indicated that you could get more out of those funds if you wanted to, but it does prevent the projects that they've been trying to get done, which then probably would lead to some sort of rate increases in our utility funds in order to, which you guys have the councilmatic authority to do if you decided to. We haven't ran the math to see what that would look like, but there are some options there. I'm not saying to do them, but I'm saying if you're looking at, let's just do what we said. I can't tell you what that would look like. I haven't ran any math to look at that, but I think those are some options. Or we either pick a B or a C, and I don't mind staying on the third floor. I'd like to get as many folks as we can. If we're vacating out there, I would like to have a peaky handshake with somebody that wants to take it, right? Otherwise, I'm more inclined just to build chambers, build parks / maybe redesign that for court, leave parks out there, and maybe there's even an option D that's even less than that. I don't know. Until we really see. I don't know where this is all going. I don't. If we had a tenant for the third floor, I'd say go, right? But we don't have a tenant for the third floor, right? We don't have a tenant for the second floor. Do we have a tenant for out there?
No, not at this time.
And they're talking about wanting less space.
Correct. So, and as we as we looked through all of this and looked through all of the floors here, trying to be able to brainstorm, not only if whether or not we remodeled some other floors to be able to actually to make it all fit. These were the best, I guess, options that we
Right.
had came up with.
Well, I think it gives
So-
you lines of demarcation where you can really sort of,
Can you remind me what, you have a budget of 7.5 million, and how much extra over that were the bids that we got?
The bid came in at 8.5.
Yeah,
but we've also got $1 million for furniture and there's other stuff on
There's
top of
other
that.
costs.
yeah.
Okay, so
So
we
you're,
have a $3 million gap is what we have.
yeah. Well, going with option B, it sounds like to me, once you do phase 1, and you're still gonna have almost another 3 million to do phase 2.
Yeah, but we just don't have the 3 million now, and so
Yeah,
either,
I get it.
either
I
we
know
get
that.
it, borrow it.
So for I'm sorry, not option 2, phase 2, we would need to bring in still more money before we could finish. that.
Yes, and that could be 4
And
or
we
5.
don't know how long,
Right,
correct?
but what you could do is you could time that with a tenant, right? If you had, what kind of lead time would you need? A year?
To finish out a phase, a
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
A year
Okay.
would be doable.
So if someone says, hey, we want the 3rd floor, I'd say, okay, $20 a square foot, that's 250 grand a year in rent. We'll go borrow some money from someplace, go finish out the rest, and we'll move out of, Laura and I and Matt and the mayor's office will move downstairs and move everybody in. I'm looking for the next, right? Park says, yeah, we're in, or state parks, yeah, we're in, we want the whole thing. There we go. There seems like I need one other something to say I'm ready to do the full meal deal. 'Cause I feel more comfortable borrowing money, right?
Yeah.
Even if it's a short-term bank loan for $2 million that we pay off over 4 years with the rent or something. I mean, there's a trigger there that gets me excited. I don't have the trigger yet to say I have a comfort level with. So then it's just, maybe it's option B and we sort of figure out who works in there. I'll need some assurances about, does that mean the entire top floor is gone? That's sort of what you're thinking?
Yes.
And they're all here.
Yep. So our
Finance is downstairs, so the one office that didn't make it is Laura and I at the mayor's office and maybe some other stuff.
So
HR.
HR? Okay.
Upstairs would be the mayor's office, HR, more than likely IS could be up on the 3rd floor, potentially GIS could be on the 3rd floor.
Okay,
And
okay,
then-
so it'd be more than just us. Okay, that's a decent use of the 3rd floor then.
Correct.
You've got 20 people working up there, okay.
So we potentially have a tenant, state parks?
State Parks would want the top floor out at Public Works.
Oh, I see, okay.
Okay, because they like that, it's a better spot for them, it works for them. Prior to COVID, I think they were ready to sign a lease for the entire top floor minus the parks area. Now with COVID and some of their people have figured out how to work from home, do they really need, I don't know what that is, 12,000 square feet, 8,000, I don't know what it is.
They were reducing what
Yeah,
space.
so now they're like, well, we only want this much, we only want this much, we only want this much, and so then the lease rates go down with that, right? So it's like, all of a sudden, they're paring down. So it's possible we could do option B, move everybody over here and have an empty building sitting out there. It'd be a beautiful building, but it could be empty. It'd be empty for a while. Right? I think we had some assurances that they were sort of excited about
Yes.
doing something
yeah.
there.
Over a year ago, there was some, excitement.
Yeah, but you've had conversations with them recently.
In the last 6 months, yes.
And-
it seems like there's a big question mark for funding and how much space they're going to need.
Why don't we, what's wrong with the option of just waiting another 6 months before we decide on what to do with it?
I think we can wait. I think that their staff is sort of giving you some options to
Yeah.
sort of consider, and I don't think they want a decision today. But I do think that we've got architects working on stuff. They're trying to predict the bid climate. I'm sure they've got contractors saying, hey, is this going to go to bid again? So I don't have any problem waiting for a period of time. I think the issue gets to how long are we going to wait? Because, I'm guessing in 6 months we'll have a vaccine and be something close to normal, 6 to 8. Everyone says June, July. Then you go to bid, you're still waiting another year after that to get it built. So now you're, again, it's just, there's some timing in there that's sort of important. And I agree with you. I'm not prepared to make a decision today, but I think
we were just really looking to be able to give you some of these phasing options that we felt like we were tasked with to share. And then really if this is something that's fitting the mark, or if we need to go back and look at something else.
I would tell you, to me, there's two options. They're either we do the full meal deal and we find some money in utilities and determine to raise those a percentage or two to get us where we feel comfortable, taking money out of the utility funds to continue to do the projects we're doing, or we spend some time over the next 2 or 3 months, find an option that works for us and go ahead and know that it's not going to be perfect, but jump in and go and know that we've got, I want some assurances, to the extent that you can get them, that even when we're done with this, there's $1.5 million, because if things sort of go a little south, we're maintaining buildings we're not using, and I don't want those to go to hell in a handbasket, right? I want those to continue to look nice, and we're going to maintain some buildings we're not using. I want to make sure we got some money in that money we borrowed to keep the facilities looking nice, right? If we do option B, I don't want to be going over by a bunch and going, oh my God, I got empty buildings and no money, and we got to be good neighbors to these places that we're owning buildings in and making sure that they're taken care of and look nice. And
If I had to make a decision right now, this minute, I would say, let's go with option B. But I'm okay with waiting if you think that's the way to go. Because I think it's good to take a clear look at everything in our options, and who knows what's going to happen, like you said, after we get a vaccine.
do you want us to spend any time looking at the utility funds, or should we just throw that in the garbage? I could ask Brad to do a little, he's nodding his head yes back there. He's doing yes.
Poor Brad. He always gets it. Brad.
The utilities aren't as healthy as, well, they're healthy, and for long term, they're healthy,
Right.
but they're counting on the current rate increases.
No. So it would be an additional rate increase, right? So the issue is, and I'll get the math wrong, instead of a 6% rate increase for sewer, we go to 8% for 6 years. That gives us X amount of dollars to fund those projects that we're going to fund anyhow. And there's an extra X amount of dollars that go to City Hall. And we do that with some of our other funds as well, just to see the math exercise, right? I don't get to vote on those things, that's your guys'. But if the idea is we're not touching utilities, and I won't have Brad waste his effort to do that.
And I think based on the calculations, the makeup of the staff that would be occupying the building is how we came up with that justification of utilities. I don't know that we've got more than $1.5 million or $2 million.
Okay.
For that, I don't think, it wouldn't be enough to do.
3.
the
Okay.
project by just that.
Got it.
So there would have to be some other mechanism. There's, I don't like saying it, but there's always the bank capacity.
Right. Okay.
So I'm in favor of, oh, go ahead, Jim, go.
Well,
You're in favor of what?
Waiting. We already told the contractors that was way too high. We've made some modifications. They already know that if they come in close to that again, we're probably going to reject it again. It was too high, so they can sharpen their pencils, go to work a little bit more and see if they can reduce some of those. I think waiting's a pretty logical choice at this point before
So I
we
think,
jump into one.
what I would suggest we do is let's wait until the first part of next year. Okay, this is already mid-September. And let's bring these options back and let's have a fuller discussion and see what we decide to do. We'll see what the economy's doing at that point. I would tell you this, I think it would be disingenuous for us to go back to bid with the same plan we had. I just don't think that we're going to have to pick an option. I don't think we can do the full meal deal. I don't think we would expect to get $3 million worth of savings because something happens in the economy. I think building trades it's just sort of where it's at. So I think we would be having to go out to bid with an option that we feel comfortable with and maybe make that decision first part of January. If something changes, that's fine. I think we could, right, if you walk in and say, hey, Parks is ready for a lease, or something changes our mind, I think we could probably jump pretty quickly. Okay. How much design work needs to be done for option B and option C?
There doesn't need to be a lot of design work.
2 months, 6 months, 2 weeks?
2 months.
Okay. So in other words, we choose option B, the architect's got to do some more work, then we get plans to go out to bid. So we're probably making the decision in opening up bids 3 months after we give them a go. Right, so if that's January, we're opening bids first part of April.
Yeah, I think, I mean, we don't want to put this off forever, but I don't think there's any compelling reason why we have to rush this thing either.
Yeah.
So I'm comfortable waiting. On the raising the utility rates and those kind of things. I think we've kind of been moving through the utilities and everything's gone up, and I just.
I'm not saying I would do it. It's your guys' call.
I know, but I'm just saying
Yeah.
I'm real uncomfortable with going there.
Yeah, I have to agree.
Okay. All right. So, now that you showed those to me, you already showed these to me once. So when I told you today that I hadn't seen the options, I lied. I already seen that. I just forgot that I had seen them.
Well, the other
I harassed them. I said, you're bringing options? I haven't even seen them yet, and we already went over these, so I'm starting to lose it, right?
Your Honor,
Yeah.
one other, just kind of a comment. You're talking about, district court and those kind of things. I don't know how common it is, but at least a couple of different cities where I've had the opportunity to go to, where they've built relatively new city halls, where they use chambers as their court.
Yeah.
So there's-
I think that would be the case, but there's rooms for jury rooms and bailiff, and there's
Yeah,
some stuff
so, I mean,
that sort of looks a little bit like where our Parks Department is supposed to be going. That when we first started this, is that Parks or is that court? Is that Parks or is that court? So it got designed for Parks. So I think if we decided on court, I think we would tweak that design and maybe leave Parks where they're at. They might be happy over there, and we might tweak that. That might be a decision that we would make and say, if we're going to redesign anyhow, would you make that for court, not Parks? And that's, it got designed for Parks. But if I was designing today, knowing what I know today about, I would probably design it for court. I don't think it's a huge change, but I think there is some stuff that would be done a little bit different in there. So I have one other thing before we go. We did talk about CARES funding last week. So we have $700 and some thousand sort of available. What we've learned in the last couple of weeks is that the chamber came to us and said, well, other cities are spending their CARES money on chamber stuff. And so Brad went and looked and said, yeah, I guess they are. How'd they do that? And they came up with some reason why. And then he read some other stuff that basically said, you just use it to cover your police costs if you wanted to. Not even extra costs, just the cost of policing if it was, you have to do it during COVID. So we have way more flexibility than we thought we had. So I've met with Laura a couple times, Brad a couple of times, and I think the decision we have made, and I'll just sort of, if you have any questions about it, I think we're going to give $500,000 to the port like we discussed. We talked about giving all 730 to them. I think we're going to give them $500,000 under the agreement that we've talked about. The remaining 230 is going to stay with our general fund. Some of that may end up with the chamber and some of it may not, depending on how we work with them on some certain things. So if that meets with your approval, we've been going back and forth on this for too long. So I think if you guys are okay with that, I think that was Brad's call today, and I don't like to give Brad too much authority, but it seemed to make sense to me. So
it's 500,000 to the
port to get to
for
businesses. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then we're going to keep 230 to
Yeah.
cover some of our policing stuff. Some of that may end up with the chamber. Some of it may not. We're sort of trying to sort through that, but
I understand.
It doesn't have to go there. We can use it internally. So if that meets with your approval, that's what we're going to do. You go with that?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah,
Okay, Laura, Brad, make it happen.
Got it.
Okay,
$1 million.
we're in regular session next week. I saw the agenda today, didn't look too bad. So, and we will have a small exec session next week, probably 20 minutes or so.
Oh, okay.
All right, anything else for the good of the order? Thanks, everybody.